Hi, folks, it's Amrita, and I'm back with another episode of Unlocking Lessons Learned. I hope you've been enjoying the series or that you catch up with some of the episodes as we go. We've covered various topics, right? We've covered emotional agility and emotional health, imposter syndrome. I've done a couple of videos now on writing, and I'm going to follow up on that with this episode. If you like, you can catch up on those episodes prior and come right back here. But I will give you a short recap. If you've watched those, and you can certainly pause and go back to the other videos or go back to consult your notes, if you've watched those, you're probably somebody who wants to write a book, a story, a play, a poem, nonfiction. You're somebody who wants to tell a story. And I think that's what's critical, and that's really what connects a lot of us, right? Who are we? What are we without storytelling? I've said this in the past as well. I think if you want to write, you should go ahead and write. And if you've watched those videos, as we recap here, essentially the idea is just get started. I shared that I think one of the tips I share with friends and other people who say that, they struggle with their schedules is that you just have to make the time. It may not be daily, but it could be something that you build into your weekly schedule. For example, choosing a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday morning and just getting your butt in the seat, ideally at a desk that you don't use for anything else. Find yourself a writing nook or corner. Some people do like to go out to cafes, and that kind of ambient white noise can be really helpful as well. Or you plug in your headphones and you get started. There's nothing as daunting as a blank screen or a piece of paper that has nothing on it. And sometimes that can be a bit of a blocker. So the idea is to just get started, and I'll share some tips today as well on how to do that. But first, build this writing into your schedule. If you don't take it seriously, nobody else will, right? So find a way that you can be spending, if it's a weekly certain amount of time, a couple of hours, you build that into your schedule, you bake it into your schedule for every week. Usually you're going to need a chunk of time, so maybe 2 to 3 hours. And out of that 2 to 3 hours, trust me, you're not going to be able to probably write for that full duration. It'll take you a while for your brain to kind of stop being super distracted. It'll take you a while to decide to finally turn off the Wi-Fi, which I highly recommend, and, to get into the zone. If you're able to do all of this, I'd love for you to drop me a comment, tell me how it's going, and good for you. So you start. And you should remember that, some of the tips we shared from the earlier videos, including from those masterclasses that I love with Neil Gaiman and Margaret Atwood, just get started. You might remember that, we had a little bit of, a session where we talked about how it's not critical to start with a plot entirely mapped out in your head. Some people start with a character. Some people start with a scene. Some people find that into the story through something very, very tangible, like, say, setting your story in a cafe. Somebody walks in, the barista spills coffee all over them, and then what happens, right? So it's about exercising this muscle, getting started, finding your way into the story. And your way in will not be my way in. Just remember, there's no hard and fast rule. I do think the more you read, the better of a writer you'll be, especially once you start writing yourself or deciding you want to write. You'll find you're paying a lot more attention to the craft of the writer, right? So you're reading a book and normally it's just point A to point B to point C, which is beautiful. And I love that. Sometimes you'll find yourself thinking, oh, I wonder how they did that. Let me go back and look at how they unlocked that kind of character development or that sort of pacing in the plot. One more tip, just remember, is that I think this was a Neil Gaiman masterclass where he said, finish things, right? Try and give yourself these writing exercises if you want, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in this video as well. But don't just give up halfway. Finish your draft. There's nothing wrong with finishing it, putting it aside, giving it a few months, coming back to it. And I do say not everything is meant for publishing, because there is also this so art and craft to this, right? You need to get confident. You need to find your voice. You don't have to put that much pressure on yourself for your first draft. We should have some news on a book I've been working on. And, it's not going to surprise those of you who know me, but it has taken me probably 7 years to get to this stage. And several of those years were spent with this manuscript just buried in the back of a drawer, essentially. I had a printout, so it's not metaphorical in that sense. But I think it's all the better for it. I had to do several rounds and edits are still going on. So I don't want to be premature in talking about it. But I do want to tell you it's a process. It can feel really painful, but there's nothing as really compelling or rewarding as finally seeing your story almost at the level that you want it to be told on paper. So go for it. And we're going to go through a few more tips in this video. So I'm going to pause in case you want to, drop in a question or comment. If you want to take a sip of water, if you want to get your notebook, you can pause the video right here. The book I'm going to talk about today for the purpose of this video is called Bird by Bird. Some of you are familiar with Anne Lamott. I'll try and put this on the video later in the edits. This is the 25th anniversary edition, so you can imagine how incredible this book is. She is an incredible best-selling author. I just read her most recent book, and I highly recommend it. I'm going to put that in the comments as well in case you want to get it. But Bird by Bird essentially is, talks about writing. She does teach students how to write, and she shares all of these lessons. And the subhead is some instructions on writing and life, and that's just how incredible Anne Lamott is. She's really put some things very clearly in this, so I cannot recommend this book enough. Please go out and get it if you can. Borrow it from someone if you can't. And I'm going to share a few of the tips that she says. I made a few notes to share with you, and we're going to elaborate on those. By the way, I keep talking about making notes, but I will share that it's really important even for your own writing and character development. So I find that an outline is helpful, a character map can be helpful, timelines, because I have very complicated sometimes flashbacks and different things happening in time. So when you're writing fiction, it's of course very different from when you're writing nonfiction, but the fundamentals are the same. You need to know your facts. You need to know what you're trying to share with the person who's reading your book. So if you're creating a world, there has to be a logic to that world, even in fiction. And someone famous said this once, right? That fiction is what stabs at the truth of things about life. The big questions are often wrestled with when you look at fiction. And not to get super esoteric with you, especially as you're starting to sit down and do a first draft. But just remember, just because it's fiction doesn't mean you're only making things up. You are conveying something about the reality of the human experience through your fiction. So if you've reached this far, that's great. I'd love for you to drop a comment, or you can sort of DM if you like. I'll try and get to the DMs at some point. But I'd love to know if you're focusing more on nonfiction or you're focusing more on fiction. Be that as it may, for today's video, and keep in mind, we may actually go ahead and do a workshop at some point, or a masterclass, our own version of a masterclass. But the notes I took from Bird by Bird just for this video, I love, and this is what Anne Lamott says. This is a quote. "The first useful concept is the idea of a short assignment." Fantastic chapter to follow. So go ahead and get that book, as I said. But what is the idea of having a short assignment? Coming back to how daunting it can be to have that blank screen or that big project in your head, which you're not sure how you're going to tackle because it's going to be your magnum opus and you're not sure how you're going to get into it. So find your way in. Give yourself a short assignment. Maybe it's not the 3-generation saga that you start with. You start with, on this day, this is a momentous thing that happened. These are the conversations. You find your way in, whether it's through the character that you like the most, whether it's through a plot point, whether it's through the narrator. Who is your narrator, right? And are you using the third person, the first person? How are you going about telling that story? So start with this short assignment. Give yourself a short assignment. So let's say you're in the cafe, you're there Saturday, 12 to 2, and you've given yourself this short assignment, which is I'm going to have 2 pages of this done by next week. Start small, and then you'll see that as building blocks, they grow and grow and grow. And this is a wonderful quote she has about first drafts, which I love. Now, practically even better news than that of short assignments is the idea of shitty first drafts. Don't you love that? Take the pressure off yourself. Just get started. Keep writing. And I know some people do say that they write and then they stop and they get a block and they edit. And that's fine. You can write and edit as you go, but just get that first draft out. There's nothing more meaningful than that. And it's perfectly fine, as Anne Lamott says, if it's a shitty first draft. She says, writing a first draft is very much like watching a Polaroid develop. You can't, in fact, you're not supposed to know exactly what the picture is going to look like till it has finished developing. I don't know if some of you remember what Polaroids are. I think they're making a bit of a comeback though. But if you remember, they're those photos you take that don't come out like perfectly developed, right? It takes a little bit of time. You used to shake them a little bit and in a few minutes, unlike how pictures were back in the day. But the idea of the Polaroid is that you can see the images, sort of blurrily coming into focus, and then you have that final product. That's what she's saying your first draft is like. And another quote that I love, very few writers really know what they're doing until they've done it. I hope some of this helps you demystify the art and craft of writing. I hope you get started. I hope you get yourself a first draft out the door. And I hope this video has been helpful.